Welcome to the Louisiana 2025 Mathematics Constructor Response Task webinar. My name is Danielle Ricks, and I am the Math Assessment Coordinator for the Louisiana Department of Education. This webinar is being recorded and will be linked into the Assessment Guidance Library later this month. As we begin this webinar, I want to remind you of Louisiana's approach to assessment. We believe that whatever assessments we make for students, that they be accessible by all students, regardless of which city they live in, which school district they are a part of, regardless of where they live or their abilities. We want to make sure our assessments are always aligned to the curriculum and the Louisiana student standards for mathematics. Today, as we begin this webinar, I want to just go over the objectives and what the plan is for today. We're going to review the constructor response design and format by each task type and review the supporting assessment resources that can help you to understand these tasks and their evidence statements and how they are assessing the student. We also want to highlight the statewide patterns in student responses and student explanations in writing that are adversely affecting their constructor response scores. And we would like to provide some instructional practices and recommendations to address these adverse patterns. Now that we have finished that portion, if you're just joining us, this is part 2 where we look at more assessment resources. We've went through the assessment guide and looked at the task types and the design of each task type and their evidence statements. So we've completed this portion. I would like to refer back to the assessment guides to point out the test design and the sample items. I would also like to introduce or review the achievement level descriptors document that some of you may or may not be aware of, and refer to our practical resources and how they can help in instruction when it comes to the constructor response task. Okay, so I'm going to use the grade 3 assessment guide. And again, if you were with us in the first portion, the assessment guides are identical in terms of structure. So when I'm looking at the test design, I'm going to go assessment design. And I'm going to scroll down until I see test design. When it comes to grades 3 through 8, this section will identify exactly how many tasks and how many points are coming from each category and within which session. So this is something I would like for you to keep in mind and refer to, so you know that I have 10 type 1, 9 to 10. So I would like for you to refer to this in keeping up with exactly how your test is structured. If you are grades 3 through 8, it tells you exactly how many tasks, how many points within each session and total. So we know 9 or 10 questions will come from major content. 3 or 4 type 1 items will come from additional and supporting. We will have 1 expressing mathematical reasoning or type 2 task worth 4 points. And we will have 1 type 3 modeling and application CR task worth 3 points in this session. And so forth throughout. So you know exactly how it's broken down and the time that is allowed for each session. I also want to remind you that anytime the test session contains a field test task, the field test task will be not counted toward the student score, And if time is needed to adjust in that session, time will be added. Now I would like to refer to this same session within Algebra 1, because 3 through 8 have the same design for the test design, in that we know exactly how many tasks, we know exactly how many points are coming from each section for each session. In Algebra 1 and Geometry, the high school courses, the information and the content is different, and so are the items. They all perform differently. So instead of giving you the exact number of tasks, which will differ based on the data for the items that we are choosing, we instead tell you exactly how many points are coming from each within each session. So session 1A is non-calculator for Algebra 1 and Geometry. So we know for sure 9 points are coming from type 1 items. So that can be from the major content category or the type. So that can be from the major content category or the additional and supporting content. In session 1A, we also can see that no type 2 or type 3 items are being assessed. So this is all type 1. And then in session 1B, 2 and 3, they're all calculator sessions. So they will include a mix of type 1, type 2, and type 3 items. As you can see, there are 7 points coming from the type 1 items. Again, major content or additional supporting. Only 3 points are coming from a type 2 item. Only 3 points are coming from a type 3 item. And in session 2 and 3, we have 13 points coming from type 1 items, 4 points each coming from type 2, and then we have 6 points each, session 2 and session 3, that are coming from type 3 items. And this is why there is a difference in this format, because 6-point items, again, are already difficult. So the data and the, what we call the p-value, which tells us the success of the item, is already low. So if we have a 6-point item that is good, but the data about it suggests that it's very hard for students and they may or may not be successful, we may choose instead to give a 6-point item at the grade level below, to choose to give 2 3-point items at the grade level below. And this applies only to Algebra 1 and Geometry. So this number of tasks will differ. It just will depend on what items we are choosing, what is the data on what is the data on those items, and if we feel that the children would do better at having, instead of a 6-point item or 2 6-point items, one set that is 2 3-point items. Okay, I would also like to refer to the sample items within the assessment guides. So I'm going to go back to the assessment guide. I'm going to stick with the one that's in Algebra 1. When we're looking at sample items, the idea is that you get to see the different item types and what it looks like in your computer-based setting. Or if you're grades 3 and 4, we have sample items that are computer-based and paper-based. So you can see the difference in their appearance for students. But you can pull these questions and give them to your students as bell ringers, as a part of an assessment of some sort. We can give these items and change the numbers, change the setup. Okay, going through some different ones, multi-select. Okay, again, we can present these items to students, and you as a teacher can take them, rewrite them, edit them, and change the values within, just so you're assessing the content. Because once we have provided these sample items and even a sample constructed response, we also provide you the answer key to these items in Appendix B. So you can see exactly where it aligns, and you also are given rubrics for those constructed response items. Now, when you're looking at these items, sometimes there are questions that are posed and what it looks like, and is it directly going to reflect what is on the test. These items are models. The content is fair. The standards that they're aligned to is correct. So they are very much appropriate for the grade level. Are these going to be the exact items? No. Could there possibly be some that look like these? Absolutely. When you're looking at these items, you just want to pay attention to the format of the item, and then looking at the content, presenting it to your students, not just in this way, but using this as one method. The other thing that I get asked a lot about is this: enter your work and your answers in the box provided. I'm going to explore this a little more later, but keeping in mind that this tells you everything that we are looking for, the work and the answer. So we want to know the solutions to this and the work that supports. Enter your answer and your justification. What is the value of C and how do you know that? Okay, in this particular example, based on the scenario, we're expecting to see an equation and an explanation in the box provided. So the student is to determine an equation that could possibly model this scenario, and this could easily be a micro model question because, again, these burn-in rates are not consistent. There is somewhat of a relationship, but it's not exactly linear. But the student may choose to write a linear equation that can model this situation and then use that equation to predict what's going to happen 5 hours later. So this is an example of a micro model, and we want the equation and the explanation. How did they determine that equation plus that predicted weight for the candle that has burned for 5 hours? These sample items are available for you to do whatever you feel necessary with them. Just don't feel limited by them, and don't think that they're the only way that we can assess an item. Now I would like to move on to the achievement level descriptors. Now, some people know about the achievement level descriptors and some do not. The purpose of these ALDs, as they're abbreviated, it describes what abilities or degrees of comprehension are present at each achievement level based on the grade level and based on the concept. Groups of standards are brought together. Instructionally, the benefit is that there are several standards that are grouped together so teachers can better see how they are related. And this can help to enhance instruction, especially in terms of planning and delivering the instruction and creating smaller formative assessment that assesses groups of standards. The constructive response benefit is that it condenses and summarizes the skills required by each evidence state more clearly and what I feel is more directly. So I'm going to go to the assessment guidance library. Okay, assessment guidance library. And that's where I will find these achievement level descriptors. And I have grade 8 already pulled up so you can see my intent. So for major content, notice, first off, the group is the radicals, integer exponents, and scientific notation, which correlates to these 4 standards. So these are related and they're grouped together. So it's saying when you analyze one of these particular standards or the group as a whole, a child at the approaching basic level can probably evaluate numerical expressions using the properties of energy. They can evaluate numerical expression using the property of integer exponents, and they probably can estimate large quantities using the scientific notation. Notice at the basic level it is the same, but we have an added benefit. The student at the basic level can probably partially solve equations of the form x squared equals p, and where p is a perfect square less than or equal to 100 by representing only the positive solution of the equation. They can still estimate very large quantities in scientific notations, but now they have the added ability to being able to perform some operations with numbers expressed in scientific notation. And as we move to the mastery level, you can see how it grows. And everything in bold tells you that growth as we move along these abilities for these individual achievement levels. So we have a child that can still perform those operations, but now they can estimate very large and small quantities using scientific notation. Not only can they evaluate squared expressions or equations, they can also evaluate those that are cubed. This child not only can evaluate numerical expression, but they can evaluate and generate equivalent expressions and apply the properties of integer exponents to other situations. And then we move to the advanced level where you see there's a new item added. They can use the appropriate units or apply the appropriate units. Not only can they perform the operation, they can interpret scientific notation that is generated from technology. They're not only estimating, but they can determine how many times as large one number is to another, and they can represent solutions to equations using these radical symbols. So this particular document, again called the achievement level descriptors, allows you to see that growth, allows you to see that growth, and allows you to be able to more readily recognize and differentiate the ability levels of your student. I also like this in terms of creating assessments. I can create an assessment where I know specifically a question is at the approaching basic level or the basic, master, or advanced, and give it to students. And based on where they can follow through and complete, we can identify their weaknesses and work on those weaknesses. So that's just a very brief description of these ALDs. And again, they group related standards together and give you that dialogue. You solving equations, and then what can they do from a systems perspective? What can they do from a function standard? And just looking at how that growth happens. And then we get down to, this is just additional supporting content. I'm scrolling down until I get to that mathematical reasoning. So again, what this does is creates a separation here between basic and approaching and those kids that are mastery and advanced and what their abilities are. And you see here is clearly and completely. The key words here is that these students are more able to present knowledge logically and sequentially, and they also answer all parts of a response. They really completely answer it, where as a child with the approaching basic knowledge, sometimes it's a bit choppy. They're not exactly clear. We know what they may intend or where they're going, but somehow they don't all the way arrive. And it goes through the process of giving you all of the evidence statement that correlates to this group, and then goes down and tells you all the pieces along the way for an approaching basic child and what they're able to do, a basic, a mastery, and an advanced child, how that knowledge differs. And I think, again, this gives you a more clearer picture. And I'm only using the grade 8 today, but this is available for all grade levels. And now we look at the type 3s. And this one is a general description that applies to all of the grade levels, that they can work with these multi-step problems and come up with plans and solutions for solving problems that arise in everyday life. Again, the abilities of someone who's at the approaching basic level, the abilities of someone at the basic level, what they can and cannot do, what is considered mastery level or advanced level. Just making sure that the child has certain skills. And again, these skills carry on from one level to the next, but there is something that is added to each level that kind of separates the basic from the mastery or the mastery from advanced. So again, this resource is called the Achievement Level Descriptors, and it is available in our assessment guidance library. I'm going to go back to the presentation now. And again, we were able to see that what happens at each level and what it looks like based on the standard or groups of standards, and then being able to really understand what is expected by those constructive response tasks and those evidence statements, being able to read through that information and understand what the responses look like at each achievement level. The other items I want to refer to are our practice tests. There is a webinar that was created about, there's a webinar that was presented and delivered on the best use or non-uses of the practice test, what to do and what not to do. This is also available in our assessment guidance library if you wish to take a look at those. So assessment guidance, this is where our achievement guide, so the assessment guidance library, this is where our assessment guides are located. But if you look right here, webinars and presentations, you have okay, that's not right. So when you look, in order to view this particular webinar or to get the materials from it, we have to go to our practice test guidance library. And the practice test guidance library is such, this is where our practice tests are located in terms of the paper-based and how to access our onlines. But this is the location of the webinar, very top, where we have that webinar that shows or that was presented to explain how the practice test should be used and not used. And I'm just going to reiterate a few of the main points. Number one, The test is not designed to be shutting out a whole week of school, a whole week of instruction to give this just like the LEAP. That is not the purpose. The purpose of the practice test is so you can get familiar with the timing and the layout of the test. It is designed based on our blueprint. So the number of items, the number of CRs, the type of items that are available, the ratio of the item types. We're trying to give you a sense of that. The items on the test can be used instructionally. You don't have to wait until March or the very beginning of April to access these. Pull the items out that relate to the units that you're working on. Give them as bell ringers. Give them as exit ticket. Give them as bell ringers. Give them as exit ticket. Give them as bell ringers. Give them as exit tickets. Use them to build a smaller assessment and see how the students perform on the item itself. But keep in mind, the practice test is just a mock-up. There's much more that goes into our LEAP summative test that cannot be quantified or put into the practice test, nor should you solely rely on the structure of the items. That maybe not be the only way that we can assess 7.RPA2. We can assess it in multiple ways. Okay. Secondly, Eagle. I'm not sure how many of you are accessing Eagle and using it, but there are new. Now we go to Eagle. I'm not sure how many of you are accessing Eagle and using the database and the item bank, but I will point out that for the past 3 to 4 months, our teacher leader advisors have been adding to the library specifically on the constructor response task level for each grade. I know personally that the item bank is now updated to include at least 6 new tasks and as most 10. And as of this past week, it may even be 12 new tasks for each grade level. I have reviewed these items and coordinated with our curriculum instruction team to make sure these items are as closely fit and aligned to the type of task and how we assess on those tasks as possible. So please access those. LEAP 360, after you have given the diagnostics, pull those items. After you've given the interims, pull the assessment items and use them from instructional person. LEAP 360. After you've given your diagnostics and your interims and the children have received their scores or you have received the student scores, pull those items, break them apart, re-give them if you need to review, RTI them or re-deliver if you feel like a child did not perform. These items are not necessarily a one-time use. The only thing that I would suggest here, strongly suggest, is that you do not pull these items before the child actually takes the diagnostic or the interim, because that will prove that the results are invalid. So again, this is just a review of some of the assessment resources that are available to support instructional practices and really kind of dive into these constructive response tasks.